Well, after one slightly less memeable year, the Busch Light Clash is back to the crash. 16 cautions over 37.5 miles. Let's talk about it. And yes, because it is past my bedtime here east of the Mississippi, the race going 37 minutes over even the TV window of 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It is indeed a bathrobe video to talk about the Clash. And you almost have to talk about these events like they're like you're doing a movie review. I mean, I was sitting there taking notes, and what I realized when I was taking notes is I was taking notes less about the racing action and literally everything else, like TV broadcasts, musical acts, crowd size, advertising, almost everything but the racing. And when the racing was actually happening, it really wasn't, because of how much we saw guys getting spun out, crashed, and parked in a way that they could not safely get out of the way before the field came back around. And I think at one point, and shout out to Tony Donahue for keeping track of this over on Twitter, I think it took about 37 minutes to run 5 laps. Now, granted, they were not counting caution laps, but this was a tough watch. A tough watch. I mean, you can go to a short track race anywhere in the country, and it's not going to look like this. I mean, in some ways, the NASCAR Cup Series drivers, who are supposedly the best at this type of racing in the world, it looked like amateur hour out there for the most part. Now, granted, a lot of it had to do with the fact that there were 27 cars out there. That was way more than have ever run the LA Coliseum. The track had been repaved this year, which already reduced some grip. And then you had fairly cool conditions because of the fact that not only was it a bit cooler today over in Los Angeles, but also they decided to run the race this year starting in the nighttime. So it was really a combination of a lot of things that caused all of these crashes. But I have to imagine at some point NASCAR was probably extremely upset with the drivers for laying an egg. Or maybe they weren't. I mean, maybe this was just exactly what they were looking for in the Clash at the LA Coliseum. But I definitely think if we're looking at this year versus last year, I definitely think that last year put on a better show for a lot of different reasons. And let's get into that. One of the things that they did not solve from last year, which I was kind of surprised, but maybe not really surprised, especially considering how long the race went this year, was the fact that nobody showed up for the heats again. And really, in a lot of ways, the entertainment bang for your buck, at least when I was watching, I kind of felt like the heat races were the most entertaining. I almost said that they were going to be more action or accident-filled than the actual race if I was judging it solely off of the first half of the Clash. But as we know, the second half of the Clash happened, and therefore the heats were very tame by comparison. But I think one of the only problems I would say with the heats is the fact that because you only have 8 cars on the track at once, everybody can see the front of the field, and therefore everyone on the track thinks that they can go from 8th to 1st in one corner, and you get a lot of dive bombs and crashes. I think the difference in crashes between the heats and the actual main event was the fact that you had accordion effects when there's a lot of cars out there, and then you have dive bombs when there's not a lot of cars out there. It's just the nature of the beast at the LA Coliseum. But once again, NASCAR did not advertise this race as starting at 5 p.m., or at least racing action starting at 5 p.m. They even had a concert before the 8 p.m. scheduled start time. So you have a situation where, the crowd, when the TV audience comes in at 5 o'clock p.m. on the East Coast time, whatever it is, 2 or 3 o'clock over on the West Coast, they're tuning in and seeing an empty LA Coliseum, and that's not really good television. It's not really very impressive. Now, if you can stick around to around the time that Wiz Khalifa was about to give his halftime show, the crowd looked a lot better. But as we'll talk about later, definitely not on the level in terms of a crowd that we saw last year in terms of size of crowd. Another big problem with the track and its design, and I think, there's definitely going to be mixed feelings on this. The problem with the LA Coliseum is it's very much a one-groove racetrack, unless you're Ryan Preece. The only way you're going to pass somebody essentially is by driving through them, which isn't necessarily a problem, but the problems, kind of compounded themselves, especially in the second half of the race when we saw more and more cars getting spun out, stuck, yellow has to come out, you turn them around, you run 5 or 6 laps under the caution. That was silly. This is a weird thing, and it's kind of a criticism of modern racing, especially modern American racing, because this whole Clash thing is really just a ploy to get in Los Angeles. It's to get in front of a new audience. It's to get celebrities to come out to a racetrack and roll out the red carpet for them. And, at one point early on, I think it was during one of the LCQs, like Gwen Stefani was in the Fox Sports broadcast booth. And I just kind of sat there and came to this realization of, like, if this was not February and there really isn't any racing on television, and if this wasn't the debut of the 2023 NASCAR season, I probably would not even bother to tune in to watch this event, because it's so, especially early on, not geared towards racing or watching racing or even paying attention to the racing going on the racetrack. And it's so much geared towards celebrity worship and Los Angeles worship, and wow, how great is the Coliseum, and look at all these sports stars that have nothing to do with auto racing. It's really not what I want to see. I've seen celebrities, obviously, celebrities have always been a part of auto racing. But most of the time, they're window dressing. They're like frosting on a cake. If you have too much of it, or if there's too much of it in your face, or especially if the frosting starts talking, there's going to be a problem. And that's kind of how I feel about celebrities at a racetrack. If they're seen, they're infrequent, and they stay quiet, I'm all for celebrities at the racetrack. But I feel like events like these, especially when they're catered around concerts, we see it with IndyCar at Iowa, you almost see people coming in just to see Wiz Khalifa and then leaving. And really the idea of an event like this, I would think, is to get your product out in front of people and actually have people, participate and consume your product. So, yeah, that's just something I feel American racing especially is really starting, top-level American racing is really starting to double down on, and I don't like it. The other thing I don't like about modern racing that they double down on are cheesy driver intros. And this is not a NASCAR-only problem. I did think the bad cop drama actor giving improv comedy during the driver intros, that was ridiculous, but frankly, I hate it at the Indy 500. I think the driver intros they do at the Indy 500 are the cheesiest thing ever. I hate it. I want them to get rid of it. I want them to go back to slowly playing on the banks of the Wabash and the drivers sauntering out of Gasoline Alley towards their cars, and the TV coverage has to do a starting grid or has to show those drivers walking out and explain to the people who they are, rather than have some comedy guy up there saying something that makes absolutely no sense for the most part. I'll give the comedy guy credit. He at least pronounced everything right. Jimmy Johnson will race, I guess, 10 NASCAR races this year. It was kind of unclear. I think it's 10 events in total across motorsports this year. He announced that it'll be at Chicago for the street course. Kevin Harvick will be in the Fox Sports broadcast booth once he retires. And speaking of the Fox Sports broadcast booth, I think, honestly, I much prefer the Fox Sports broadcast booth over NBC at this point. I think Mike Joy is a national treasure. I've really enjoyed him over the last couple of years. I think Clint Boyer's starting to come into his own. And God, I wish they'd just hire Tony Stewart. I wish they'd keep Tony Stewart all year long. I've always thought Tony Stewart would be a great color analyst, and he has proven that. I just wish they could keep him around. I do not want this to be a points race. I'll tell you that right now. Because when Michael McDowell stopped on track and couldn't even get into the pit lane and brought out a yellow, you can't do that. I mean, you can't put on that show for a mid-season race. Like I just said, I probably wouldn't even tune in. I mean, what's the point? Let's double the race length, double the amount of cautions, yeah, I think it would be really silly. And to that point, Fontana, man, there's still time, NASCAR. You can stop what you're doing. Please don't reconfigure Fontana, especially don't reconfigure it into a copy of this. For the love of God, come to your senses. Come back to the light side. Don't tear down Fontana. Please, for the love of God, don't do it. Please don't. Mufflers. They ran mufflers at this race. I don't know if this is an advantage, but the difference with the mufflers is that now you can hear cars spinning out. And boy, oh boy, did we hear a lot of cars spinning out. Bubba Wallace said over his radio that the bumper-to-bumper contact still hurts. So like I mentioned in yesterday's video about the fires, which is being blamed currently on a misinstalled muffler, but we'll have to see as the season goes on how many more fires we got. Thankfully, no cars ablaze today. Bubba Wallace mentioned how hard the hits were bumper to bumper, especially rearward or front to rear impacts. And of course, he was the driver in front getting hit from behind. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully no more concussion issues. Ryan Preece, very impressive. Proved Tony Stewart right, I think. Was very, very quick. I know he's a short, flat track oval driver, and we'll have to see when he gets to the super speedway at Daytona whether Tony Stewart's absolutely validated, but I think Tony Stewart's definitely on the right track, bringing Ryan Preece and pushing for Ryan Preece to be in that car. Ryan probably would have won the race had it not been for an electrical issue. Kyle Busch. He's back, as if he never left. I was so impressed with Kyle Busch today. Getting spun out early, driving all the way through the field, but having the presence of mind to let his faster teammate, Austin Dillon, go through. Unfortunately, Austin Dillon ruined a great race for Bubba Wallace, who at times looked like he was going to win the race. Bubba was the winner of the halfway stage break. But I think Kyle Busch is going to be reinvigorated at RCR, and I think it's going to be fun to watch him this year. Yeah, it was unfortunate with Bubba Wallace, for sure. I'm curious to see what he does this year. I think there were three real distinct drivers that really showed up and showed out this race that didn't win, and those are Wallace, Busch, and Preece. But I guess we finally are going to have to talk about Martin Truex Jr., who was absolutely dominant in this race. There's all sorts of rumors about his future. I'm curious if he has a successful year, if some of those rumors will die down. But, man, I'm looking forward to Daytona, believe it or not. I always do enjoy Speed Week, although it's too short for my liking. I want them to go back to Speed Weeks, plural. But let's face it, NASCAR is not going to listen to any of my suggestions in this video, and in fact, probably going to turn every racetrack into the LA Coliseum, and we're going to have to deal with that for the rest of our lives. So, Daytona coming up. David Land Podcast, 8 p.m. tomorrow. I'm sure we'll be talking about this as well as many other things. Thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I'll see you in the next video.